The United Nations worries that 40% of the 6,000 indigenous languages spoken around the world are in danger of disappearing. And so the General Assembly declared this year as a year to celebrate indigenous languages. So we are learning a bit each week about Mi'kmaq from Bernie Francis. Not only is Mr. Francis a linguist, he is one of the people who created the orthography, the spelling system for Mi'kmaq. Bernie, Gwe Weldasi Nandige Pegason.
Oh, Walalin, Gina, Walalin. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, and you are, of course, most welcome. I said last week Jalasi, but it's actually Ipjalasi.
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 Right.
Could you just describe what Ipjalasi means?
Sure. You will notice that it will be translated as simply welcome. Because that's what you do when you translate from one to another. You know, you translate it in a way that people will understand it. The other thing is it doesn't become so cumbersome because it is rather, it means a lot more than just simply welcome. When you say to someone, particularly in the days when we still lived in wigwams, and those wigwams were quite comfortable, as I stayed in one once, you're telling someone when they arrive at the door and you say Pchilasi, you're actually saying to this person to take the most comfortable part or the comfortable position of your home. And that usually means behind the fire that's in the middle. And he would go directly behind that fire and sit there so that he could look to the left or to the right without straining his neck. And he could also see the door, what we call the doorway, which would have been a fur or blanket or something or other. And so it's a very comfortable spot there. And that's what he's being asked or being offered.
And it is, I mean, it's extreme courtesy.
Absolutely.
It's like sacrifice, almost sacrificial courtesy. I love those little windows. I love the windows that language can give us.
Yes, that's right. If there were a child sitting in that spot, and of course that would be not unusual, he would be asked to move and allow the guest to sit there. So it's quite nice because the word Bejili means the highest. So Pchilasi means take the highest or the most revered spot in my wigwam.
Now, last week when you were here, we spoke very briefly about residential schools and the way they punished Mi'kmaq kids for speaking their own language. Now, you mentioned that you did not go to a residential school yourself.
That's correct.
Your father did, but you wanted to go.
Yes, I did want to go because it so happened that my adoptive father was a guy who unfortunately had to suffer the treatment that he endured while going to school at the residential school at that time. So what he learned there was passed on to me, and it was not a very good relationship, you know. I was just a small boy when I was adopted, perhaps 2 weeks old, and he died when I was 12. So he had a real rough time coming to terms with the residential school experience, and he sure liked his belt. So that was our punishment stick, shall we say. But it was terrible. I mean, it was terrible for him. You know, he suffered from alcoholism because of it and so much, you know, he just had a very tough life, and he died at the age of 42. So somehow, tough as it was, I managed to sneak out of that predicament and start traveling, and that's really what helped me along the way.
And you had, we're going to talk about the orthography and your accomplishments as a linguist in a bit, but as a young man, my colleague Alex Mason and I were saying earlier, if this is all you had done, you would still be an incredibly accomplished person and have made incredibly valuable contributions. You worked for the courts as a young man.
Yes, I did.
Helping Mi'kmaq speakers understand what was happening when they went before the judge.
Correct. It didn't start out that way, actually. I had absolutely no idea what was happening in the courts. I got a job that summer with the John Howard Society, which is an aftercare agency for people who have been released from jail or prison, you know. And I got a summer job, actually. So I worked with them, and I dealt with non-native persons mainly. But at that time, when I used to have to accompany them to court, I used to notice that my people would be called in front of the judge, and the judge would read the charge, and every single time it was a guilty plea. And my people didn't waste any time pleading guilty. And in many cases, in fact, almost all cases, they didn't have a real clear idea on what was being said in the courts because they were mainly Mi'kmaq speakers, not English. So they would. The other thing is that they don't like, my people are really, I guess you could almost say, very shy to a fault that way.
Oh.
They don't like being sort of on display, which you are in court when you're asked to go up in front of the judge. And they want to get out of there so fast that they would plead guilty to almost anything.
So they didn't, in some cases, understand what was happening.
Actually, it was in most cases. It was after seeing this happen day in and day out. The Union of Nova Scotia Indians was only about a year old then, because it began in 1969. That was our first political organization. So I went to our offices that were located at my reserve, namely Member 2 in Sydney, and I took the executives aside and explained what I had been witnessing. And they listened quite intently, and but not really sure what to do about it. So I said to them, I need to write a proposal to the government whereby we could have what we call the court worker program. It's kind of almost like a John Howard Society, except you're not waiting for people to come out of prison, but you're people who are charged with whatever should be accompanied by a native person who speaks the language. And therefore, they could also act as a translator. And so they did help me with the proposal. And they said, well, let's double up the number because we'll probably get only half of it. So I sent in something like $52,000 or something I applied to the government for. And when it arrived, I got every cent. So
really? Yes.
That was, they must have seen something that might be worthwhile. And I spent the next 4 years doing nothing but working in the courts and acting as translator and so on.
And how did the courts receive you, Bernie?
Initially, they really didn't care one way or the other. They thought this was just, I'm just another token Indian, that's simply going to go by the way things are in the courtroom. Well, when they began to realize that all these, if I may quote this word, Indians were coming in and pleading guilty to anything, things began to change. They realized that everybody was pleading not guilty. And not only that, I put a little ad in we had our own newspaper that was run by Roy Gould from Member 2. It was called Micmac News. And so I put in a little notice there whereby advising my people that if they're charged with anything at all, to plead not guilty first and then come and see me, and then I will look at your case and then take you to the legal aid lawyer, which just began at that time around 1970. And the legal aid lawyer at the time, Art Molan, was very, very cooperative, and he was a great help to my people. And then I became very unpopular with the judges and the prosecutors because I was now loading up the dockets. In other words, people had to work for their money. And whereas before it was just a simple thing, an Indian comes up, he pleads guilty, off to jail he goes, and that's all there is to it. But that wasn't happening anymore after that. So I began to feel I was more of a liability to my clients than a help.
Really?
Oh, yeah, because if they don't like me, in all likelihood, they don't like the people that I was working for.
But did it not help in the sense of fewer convictions for Mi'kmaq people?
Oh, absolutely it did. But it was very difficult. They didn't make it easy. Like one judge, one time when I actually said to the judge that we felt that we had a right to a translator because we had what was called the Canadian Bill of Rights at the time, and Section 2B stated quite clearly that anybody who asks for an interpreter is entitled to one. But this one particular judge said, when I asked for a translator for my client, he said, no, we're not going to have this charade here and so on. And he just completely and totally denied a translator. So they're the ones that violated the law at that time.
Well, we're going to come back. I want to continue this conversation. So, Bernie, you're going to stay with us. I want to talk a little bit about the orthography.
Sure.
When we come back.
Okay.
You're listening to Main Street on CBC Radio 1. It is 90.5 FM in Chibuktuk. One of my colleagues went online today looking up Mi'kmaq greetings on wikimedia.org, and he noticed at the top there was a note on the website that says the Mi'kmaq text in the below table is in Francis Smith
Right.
orthography.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right? And you, Bernie Francis, you're the Francis, right? Referred to in the Francis Smith orthography, rather.
Correct. Yeah.
How did you get involved in that?
In 1974, after deciding that I would have to leave the court worker program, I had already befriended a linguist by the name of Douglas Smith, and he was working on his dissertation for his PhD, and he wanted to do it on the Mi'kmaq language. So he came to Cape Breton, and he spent time on the reservation. And when he arrived, he got a job with the Mi'kmaq Association of Cultural Studies. Director at that time was Dr. Peter Christmas. And so his mandate was to design an orthography that children could easily learn. And then Doug brought over documents one day that were written by Father Pacifique from France in the 1910, I think he began, something like that. And Doug asked me if I would read them. He put them on my kitchen table. I looked at it and I said, "No, I can't read this." He said, "Why can't you read it?" I said, "Well, I never really studied it. Never really learned how to read or write the language." He said, "Well, have a look at it." So when I looked at it, in no time at all, 2 hours had gone by. And I couldn't believe it myself that I was able to figure out the writing system.
But what was the writing system, Bernie?
It was using the Roman alphabet, just like English does. The problem was he used 13 letters of the Roman alphabet. And that under-differentiated the sounds that the Mi'kmaq language had.
The diphthongs and the different...
but mostly he didn't mark vowel length.
Of course.
That's the one thing. And the second thing is he didn't mark the velar, or better known as the guttural.
The h.
Yeah, that's right, the h sound. He didn't mark that either. And there were all kinds of problems with it and too much guesswork involved. So when I sat down to have a look at it, I was able to figure it out. Doug said, "Have you ever considered studying linguistics?" And I said to Doug at the time, I said, "Well, I might, if I knew what it was."
Yeah.
I couldn't even pronounce the word linguistics at the time. So I gave it a try, and fortunately I got the job, and I took to linguistics like duck to water. I absolutely loved it.
And then you and Doug Smith set out to create an orthography for the Mi'kmaq language.
Exactly. We actually what we did first is to try to figure out how many sounds are there in this language. Like you see, every language has a sound system. Like the English language has about anywhere from 50 to 55 sounds approximately, depending on which dialect you speak.
Right.
Like Newfoundland has 5 dialects of English, out of which 2 would need a translator. But they have a different sound system too. But they only use 26 letters of the alphabet. Well, we have about 27 distinctive sounds in the Mi'kmaq language, but we only have to use 17 letters of the alphabet to accommodate for those sounds.
So you had to, that was job number one then, to isolate the phonetics, I guess, of the language.
Right, exactly.
And then you have to figure out, how do we now represent
That's
these?
Exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. We had to then look at the alphabet, the English, the system, and see which letters would work, And then we chose these certain letters. But the most interesting one, of course, was the Q. We chose the Q to represent that velar, that guttural sound. So
yes.
if you ever, each time you see the Q, as in the word Mi'kmaq, which is the plural for Mi'kmaq, shall we say?
Okay, yes.
Every time you see that Q, you know that you must pronounce it with a guttural sound.
Mi'kmaq.
Mi'kmaq, exactly.
Mi'kmaq.
Right, exactly.
So, what is the difference then between? Because last week you very graciously corrected my pronunciation. I said Mi'kmaq, but then there is also, that's the one that we know, M-I'-K-M-A-W.
Correct.
There is also then the M-I'-K-M-A-Q.
That's correct.
Mi'kmaq.
Right, exactly.
So what is the difference between those two words?
Okay, the first one with the W at the end, there's only the one letter that's different. One ends in a W, the other ends in a Q. The one that ends in a W can behave like, if it's in the adjectival position, then it's an adjective, of course.
So
And
the Mi'kmaq language.
like
the
the
Mi'kmaq language.
Exactly. In that case, it would be considered an adjective. And then in other cases, it would be a noun. Simple as
Right,
that.
right.
Whereas the Q it will never be an adjective. It will be a noun, but it'll be a plural noun.
So the Mi'kmaq, the
Mi'kmaq.
people,
That's right.
If we're talking about the people. But last week we talked, going back now to the orthography, and thank you for that lesson. That's something that was going around in my head all week. I was like, I have to ask Bernie about this. Last week you said that there were between 8,000 and 9,000 people who are fluent speakers.
Right.
How many people would be able to read or write based on the orthography now?
That's a good question. I'm not absolutely sure, but I will tell you this. Prior to 1980, hardly anyone was writing it. You know, if they were writing it, they might have been using the old Pacifique system as best as they could at the time, with all its problems. But since we had Facebook, it's shocking. You know, there's so many Mi'kmaq people now that read and write the language. I'm not saying that their spelling is perfect yet, but who cares? It's all brand new to us. You know, it's only 40 years that we've actually started to write the language. So if there are a few errors, it's perfectly understandable. But at least now, not only are they reading and writing the language, but they're actually arguing about it. They're having big discussions on words and what this means and how this one would be accurately spelled and so on. And even the place names sometimes would be a matter of discussion. In fact, if you don't mind, I heard just the other day that one of our own people interviewed by CBC, by the way, talked about Unama'ki. Now, Unama'ki is Cape Breton.
What we know as Cape Breton,
you know as Cape Breton. Now, he said that it meant the land of the fog. That is simply not true. If it was land of the fog, then it would be Unagi. Unagi. But as a linguist, you have to take every morpheme into account. So what happened to the Unama'ki? What happened to it? He didn't explain it. Nobody explains it. That's why you can't be doing that. If you're going to analyze a word, you have to analyze all of the morphemes, you know, which are smallest unit with meaning. They're not words, but they have meaning.
Yes,
Then you have to do all of that in order to arrive at an accurate translation.
Do you have an alternative meaning for it, or are you just saying that is an oversimplification?
No, well, actually, it has nothing to do with fog. Because if we have long vowels, and the word for fog is un, right? U apostrophe N. But it's not Unama'ki, it's Unama'ki. It's a short U. So that's the first indicator that's nothing to do with fog. Second thing is I actually looked around for that word a long time ago and realized Unama'ki was just a variation of Mi'kmaq, which means Micmac territory.
Okay.
Just like Miramichi. Miramichi is just a mispronunciation of the word Mi'kmaq, which again is Mi'kmaq territory.
Now, does Miramichi arrive as Miramichi? Is it an evolution of the Mi'kmaq language, or is it just as the French came in and stuff that it kind of changed over to Miramichi?
It was a mispronunciation.
Much like Micmac was.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just a mispronunciation. It's no big, I mean, you're not insulting anyone by saying Micmac. Some people are a little bit afraid.
Yeah.
That's taken it a little bit too far.
Yeah.
It's not that it's insulting in any way whatsoever. It's just that people finally have an opportunity to show their pride about their language. So they would like things to be corrected, from years of abuse.
Absolutely. And it's just like one thing. If I call you Bertie, and you say, actually, it's Bernie, then it's a great discourtesy for me to insist on calling you Bertie.
That's right.
Thank you so much for coming in today.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Bernie Francis is a Mi'kmaq linguist and elder, and he will be back on Main Street next Tuesday and as many Tuesdays as he's willing to come in. If you missed his first visit with us last week, you can find it on our website, cbc.ca/mainhfx.
This is CBC.